All right. So, um, we're here today because we just need a little. I think it's worth having a little refresher on what happens when you need to design pages, but you don't have all the components that you need to design those pages, because that happens a lot. I think with the way that we do things, and it's not that this has become some massive problem, but there have been a few folks who've raised flags that it's not always obvious what they should be doing when they aren't getting clear indications of what shape the design should take, and how long a story should be, when it's going to come in, will it have art, will it have boxes, stuff like that. And we want people to be able to design in advance of those stories actually ending up dropping into the component list, because that helps speed things along when they do finally hit the DD basket. Um, so part of this came up, I suspect, because we've recently, had the run into Q. The newsrooms are starting to use Q, and not a lot of the news deskers have had a lot of training on Q. Some have, some haven't, but that's really not terribly relevant. But in using Q, the newsrooms have transitioned from measuring stories in lines and inches to measuring stories in words, which has created a learning curve, for them and for us. They're struggling to learn Q, and we're struggling to translate lines and inches to words. So that's why I have, you'll see in the second item, I've provided a link that is the conversion chart of lines to words. And when you click on it, you will actually see even more information than that. It will tell you, um, I'm sorry, it goes inches to words, and it will tell you, uh, according to the column width of the the three sizes of papers that we tend to deal with. Most papers are 9.3 pp column width. The narrowest ones are 8.9.67. So these have different word counts per column width. Obviously will vary, and the
Eric,
widest one.
can you open that up and just show them what that looks
Sure.
like?
So you can see here, um, the 9.3, 8.96, 9.66, and that's going to, it also tells you, like, most papers are this, and then Lexington and Macon are here, and State College Miami, and those are the widest. So you can save that. It will come in handy unless you have already completely acclimated to seeing somebody say we've got 2,000 words, and you just knowing that it's 80 inches, which yeah, God bless you if you know that already. Okay, back to this. Of course, that's not the only issue, and it's not even really the biggest issue. The most significant struggle, is when you run into a print plan that's either not on time or is been marked ready, but it's missing information. I know I run into that frequently, and in fact, I could look at a couple I dug around, found, actually, I was trying to find some examples, and it looks like everybody did a really good job on their print plans today, all the ones I looked at. But here's an example of a print plan. This is for Raleigh. This is their Wednesday print plan, and you can see how they have, their lead story is going to be a Trump Iran from Wires, and they don't put, newsrooms don't typically put links on the Wire stories. We can either find out from talking to the Wire editors, or they might put that information on Slack if you ask them to, but the newsrooms aren't going to be responsible for that bit of information. But they have their an election centerpiece, and a down pager on video games. They know that the election story is not going to come in till around 7:30. They've noted that. They're estimating 400 words, which is going to come out to be about uh, 15, 16, 17 inches, something like that. Um, 1,200 words for the bottom with a photo. So they've got a lot of good information here, and same with their sports plan. They're giving you the information that you need to go ahead and start designing that by having the appropriate lengths. I looked over and found that Charlotte has done a pretty good job here. And if you can see on their plan that in some instances they have the number of words and in some instances they don't. Very often that means if they don't have it, you got to look to make sure you should look to make sure that that story has not already been filed, because we do not ask them to use a word count or actually provide, extraordinary amounts of information if the story's already been filed, because you can look at the story and all that information is right there, so we don't need them to be redundant and then fill out all this stuff. But if the story's not there, so I'm going to look at their sports report here, and it says that their Hornet story CP is in. They've told us specifically kind of how they'd like it treated. Um, they've got a sidebar with it, and that's not in. And they haven't told us how long that is. And they have a down pager that is not in, and they haven't told us how long that is. And I suspect that that has become, you know, that's sort of the biggest stopping point for designers when they run into this. Um, so I don't have, if people were tuning in hoping for this magical formula of somehow deducing the length of a story by looking at the print plan without that information, then yeah, I'm afraid I don't have that kind of a magic wand. But this is really more of a conversation about what to do to get that information from the newsroom, because some of them just aren't great about doing it, some of them are great about doing it, and some of the, it can be hit or miss. Obviously people go through a lot of, newsrooms go through a lot of they have their own stretches of things being hectic, and things get dropped through the cracks sometimes. So um what we hope to do is to offer folks some suggestions on how to get this information, and to hopefully do it in a way that helps it start to come more readily, more regularly anyway. So first of all, you got to make sure when you're looking at the print plan that they don't have the information listed maybe in not exactly the space you would be looking for it. Maybe they didn't use um, the column that says length. Maybe they put the word count in the notes. So just make sure that they haven't actually given you the information already, because they don't they don't love that when they've given it to us and then we have to ask them anyway. Um, but once they've passed their deadline for completing the section of the print plan, if they don't have the level of information that you need, which is for stories that haven't been filed, word counts and photos and fact boxes, then it is important for you to reach out and ask for clarity. Start with the assumption that they didn't, willfully disregard this information. They just, either, they just lapsed and didn't put it in, or whatever. To start from that position that they have it and they'd love to give it to you. So send them I'd start with an email or a G chat, and however you tend to communicate with this particular newsroom. I know that varies throughout the company, but whatever it is that with this editor, if you're used to emailing or chatting, whatever, and use that as a starting point. And if they haven't gotten back to you in 15 or 20 minutes, then it's probably time to make a phone call. And I know that that's where the stumbling block for a lot of people. They don't want to bug the editors when the editors are busy, but this is this is the best way to get them to understand how the importance of this information to us. If you've gone 15, 20 minutes and they haven't gotten back to you by a phone call, and by the way, you should see on each of these plans, I'll go look at the Raleigh one again. Up in the top left corner, it says the editor, and that is going to be your newsroom contact person. If for some reason that is not there, then you're going to have to use an alert message, which is the newsroom code plus alert@mcclatchy.com. And that's going to send an email out to a broader group of people in the newsroom. So, 3 or 4 or 5, whatever people will get it. And someone is almost certain to respond to you. I've had very good luck with that. Um, Also, one of the newsroom's sort of pet peeves is that sometimes we aren't excellent at putting our own contact information in there. So please try to be diligent about using your contact information when filling out your tiny little piece of the print plan, so they know who to talk to if they have, if something comes up. So once you've gotten a hold of this editor, however you came to do so, if they're hedging about having the information available, like, oh, we just don't know, you know, it's important to try to explain to them the necessity that we have to include for them to include a budgeted length, so that we can design their product before the content arrives. And if they need convincing, it's we have to remind them that it's this arrangement that sort of gives them the extra time to file the story. We're not saying you have to have your story by 3:30. We're just saying we have to know what you want out of that story at 3:30. And sometimes that may not happen in one conversation where you're going to get compliance, but be nice and be gentle, but be forceful uh over time. Ask for it, and if you have to keep asking for it, allow for whatever allow whatever you might think is a reasonable amount of time before, like, okay, this is just isn't working. I need this to escalate, at which point um you're probably going to want to reach out to a supervisor and tell them the details of where you're running into a problem, and if it's somebody in particular, if it's a newsroom in particular, or you've just let a supervisor know, and then we can discuss it and figure out the best way to determine what may be keeping them from getting us this information. It could be something we don't even know about, and so give us the opportunity to try and to work that out for you. And that's the magic. That's the magic key, is communicating with these newsrooms and letting them know when they have not done something. And the importance is, if you sort of suck it up and just wait, that's going to cause some production problems for you. It could cause production problems for other people, but almost more importantly, it sends the message that we don't really need it, and that we can live without it, and they can just file the story and whenever it's ready, and that takes care of it. And maybe for you, that's fine. Maybe you have worked it out in a way that you can wait on that thing and it's not a problem. I wouldn't recommend that, because I think that you probably possibly can't see downstream effects of waiting on that for design. But the next designer that picks up that section, they may not have that philosophy, and they're definitely going to want that information. And when they call to talk to the editor's going to wonder why they're hearing about this. They're like, I didn't know that that was a necessity. So it's important that every point when you feel like you're not getting the information that is required, that you have to give a little pushback, uh generously, kindly, in a way that's not adversarial, but in a way that it reinforces the notion that this isn't an optional bit of information, but this is essential information that we need. And with that, I would like to open up to any questions, or if Robin has anything that she'd like to add, then here we are.
Well, Eric, I was hoping you could go to layout. I don't think this is a surprise to you. Go to Layout Champ and show us the dummy copy and Layout Champ, and how you could, so it's going to be 700 words. How do you literally block it out to be 700 words long
Sure.
when you don't have the content?
All right. Let's since we were already looking at this, open up something here. Because I'm going to open up a Charlotte page here. This is going to be their news page for tomorrow. So let's say we've got a couple. Let's just pretend it's a local page and that there's local stories, and they've given you the line counts. Then you got a, I don't know, 400 line story and a 800 line story. You're just going to start dumbing.
He's saying lines, but he means words.
I'm sorry, words. Again, like everybody else, I'm completely acclimated to thinking in lines and inches, and it's just going to be, I don't know, 10 or so years until I figure out words, but I'm working on it. So you can see in our new dummy text, I'm hoping that everybody has taken the opportunity to look that our dummy text has changed from lines and inches. It used to say lines and inches, and now it says words. where the lines and inches used to be. So I can see by stretching this across the space given that I have a total space of 1140 words. And so now I just have to winnow that down to the spaces that I need. So let me look at my budget here real quick. Let's just say I got a 500 word legislative story and a 500 word district attorney story. I'm not sure if both of those are going to fit there in this space, but I know that I can get one of them in there. So I'll just start building and counting my words. Maybe we got some mugs in there because election stuff.
And he's saying maybe, but you would know because you would be looking at the print plan and it would say it
Right,
needed
and it would
6
say that.
mugs.
So,
Or if you were building an election page and thought to yourself, I bet there should be mugs with this story, and you didn't see it on the print plan, that might be the kind of thing you would reach out about.
Right. And so then I just zoom in and look, 460. So we need 500.
That he's looking at the very last leg of type
Mm-hmm.
as he's adjusting, and right now you see it says 490 words, flummoxed by job,
you can see the highlighted.
That's Iraq, etc. So as he adjusts the text, he can see the word count, how many words are fitting.
And that's that.
So it looks like that's about 500 words. Right. Now, what happens if there's real text in there? So they've got an early draft, and it's got some text in there, but it's going to grow. And you know it's going to grow to 500, but right now it's only got like 30 words in it.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then what you're going to see is, you're going to go by the length that they've budgeted, and even so, you'll have the word. Let's say they've got half of it, 250 words are showing, and that will take you up to about here. After which there will be no more words, but you can take off the dummy. You take off the assigned type, the live type that's in progress. Make sure that you get to the end and can see that you're, right about your 500 word mark. And
so if you wanted to demonstrate this, Eric, just take your text tool and type in the first leg. This is just, I'm going to type anyway. This is just a demo. So here, somebody started typing. They've started a draft of the story, but it's going to be considerably longer before it's actually filed. So how do you know whether you're leaving 500 words worth of space or 200 words worth of space? How do you know?
Well, and of course, the best way to do that is to start by designing the dummy with the correct number of lines before you apply the actual content. But if you haven't done it in that direction, then once you have it, you've dummied a space that you think is 500 words, and then you revert to dummy and take a look to see where you stand. And so we stand at 490 words. It sounds pretty darn close. So then you can reassign content and just know that it's going to sit there. It's going to flow into the right space. Now, I guess the difficulty is what happens when this story then becomes 700 words. Well, that's going to depend on, let's just assume it's a local story. They've given you a budget for 500 words, and if you're in a spot where you've laid out these pages and you've moved on, then it's reasonable to say that we need to trim to 500 words. If you have easy trims that you can make, or an easy adjustment because maybe you have a wire story below it that can be adjusted, you lose a photo or something, then that's fine. I mean, we want to be accommodating as much as possible, but once they've budgeted something for 500 words, that thing shouldn't come in at 1,000 words. And we know sometimes that does, but we need to try to preach avoidance of that.
And I'm just going to come in on that too and say that one thing I love about designers is they love to solve problems. However, sometimes that means that designers are enabling editors to do poor planning. And so if there are times when you have to hold somebody to the 500 words because that's what they budgeted and you built your page around that, and you've now moved on to another whole section, you don't have time to go and rebuild this page, to tear it up and rebuild it, then know that your supervisors will stand behind you on that, and that we will back you up if anything comes of it, and say, you know what, you said 500 words, we laid it out 500 words, and so we have finishers on our desk who are capable of trimming. We'll trim it to 500 words, and we're going to move on with the day. So to reiterate Eric's point, if there is an easy fix you can make, of course, make the easy fix. But if there's not, don't lose sleep and don't jeopardize deadline on another section because you feel compelled to go in and make up for poor planning on an early section.
And to add another layer to that, maybe you're dealing with an editor who is always dead on, in this one time, that the one time they're over, maybe that's where you bend a little bit. If you're dealing with, you could be dealing with an editor who's just every day 200 lines short on what they think that story should be. Then you still have time, but you might want to send the message that these budgeted lines, these budgeted word counts matter, and shouldn't be getting them used to, well, I can budget 400 and turn in 600.
And so what if the opposite happens, Eric? What if they budget 500 and when all's said and done, it's 300?
Well, what we would typically do in that situation is we would, reduce the length of the story, and then find ourselves, the appropriate filler to, hopefully a filler. Hopefully we can find an easy, quick newswire filler to throw in beneath it, or a brief, super brief, or in the absence of any of those, then if house ads are available, then you can use those. I mean, usually, very often, you'll see that there's photos available with a lot of the stuff, and so you can use that to, add flexibility to the package.
Yeah, and I would second that. If you have the ability to make up for the shortfall within that one article without having to adjust other things on the page, which may already have been through the finishing pool, then that is preferable to shifting everything around on the page in order to accommodate a filler ad elsewhere. So
Absolutely.
Remember that at your disposal are other photos that may be in the package. You could add a lift out. You could add a second line ahead, which that would be a hefty head, but they came up 200 words short. So, it's about balancing with the tools that are at your disposal to try to minimize those dominoes, because what is harder for our whole group to deal with, not just the designer, is if you end up taking design done off of 3 stories on this page, reconfiguring them, and then sending 3 stories back through the finishing pool a second time. Because that's not only impacting taking time out of your day, but it's also taking time out of the finisher's days. So try to minimize those dominoes as much as possible.
All right. Does anybody have any questions coming from you guys that we haven't thought about yet? Because that's one of the big reasons to have this, is to hear things that we hadn't considered.
For those who were not able to get on the main Hangout and are watching through YouTube, feel free to send a Google chat message to Eric if you have a question, and he will respond.
Yeah, Google Chat. I love
Eric
that.
Eric Edwards at mccnewsdesk.com.
I hear Ricky typing away behind me, so I think he might have something to ask here. And there we have it. The question here is, how would you go about a page with wire stories and none were in? Well, the newsroom's not going to be budgeting links for the wire stories, so we're going to have to use our best judgment about what a reasonable length for a wire story is, and plan around filling spaces with super briefs, or with wire stories. Very often you have art, so you got a lot of flexibility with wire pages. And also, it's good to reach out to the wire desk to get a sense of what links these things might be. I mean, I know that many wire editors have a sense of, well, this is coming from the Post, it's going to be really long. This is coming from so and so, it's going to be pretty short. So, reach out to the wire editor. They're going to have information, and they might even be posting that information on Slack if you ask them, and then everyone will know.
Yeah, you
Mike
can
Home.
reach out. You can reach out to them by the Slack channels. That's a good way to reach out to them, where other people could benefit from the answers. You might frequently get the answer that it'll be whatever length it needs to be in your paper, because there are many, many times where a story runs 25 inches, whatever the current equivalent to that is in words, in one paper, and 15 inches in another. That happens with frequency. But I would advise you, if you were doing a standalone story, to not make it run less than, say, uh, what did I say, Eric? Because I was looking at the numbers.
12, 15 inches.
Yeah, but we're not talking in inches. I gave
So
you the
375 words.
So don't run for a standalone wire story. Really, any less than about 275 or 300 words just really probably is not enough space. So if you're doing a standalone wire story, you want to make sure that you're giving at least 275 or 300 words. And then you can, of course, give more space than that, because frequently those wire stories have a lot of depth. So you could set something up as a centerpiece that had, twice that many words, and count on, as long as it was a story with a high priority, you can count on the fact that there would likely be text to fill it.
Mike Homan asks, some papers ask designers to pick up story folders from other McClatchy newspapers. Is that okay for designers to do this? I believe the answer is that they should be, the newsroom, if the newsroom wants a story from McClatchy paper, they should be directing a print package to their own product and aim it where they want it to be.
That is indeed the current standard, that we expect that if a newsroom is picking up a sister paper's content, that they will package that content for their product. That doesn't necessarily mean they want to run it at the same length, though. For instance, if Charlotte is running a Panther story as the centerpiece on their sports front, and they want it to be 500 words, Raleigh may be running it inside and want to give it 300 words. And so it is possible that you will see a word count on a print plan that differs from what that word count is in the originating newsroom, and that would be a sign that the secondary newsroom wants to run it at a different length.
Kelly Lip asks, can you also talk about getting pushback and looping in the coordinator? And of course, pushback is always possible. You're going to run into tonight's election night, for example. You're going to run into somebody's going to say, well, we're just not going to know. There's no way to know. And, I think the first line of defense there, if that's the right word, and it's probably not, is to say, well, you have to use your best guess, and probably guess on the low side. We'd rather you come in a little bit long so we can trim than a little bit short, and we have to, find ways to fill things. If you continue to get pushback, then yeah, loop in the coordinator and bring in somebody else to sort of back you up and have a conversation with the newsroom, to again emphasize the importance of, having a plan and sticking to it. Anybody have any other questions? All right. Well,
look at that, Eric. You're ending right on time.
I love 2 minutes early, even. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for stopping in, and I hope this was useful to some folks. And if you have questions, feel free to let me know, or Robin, and we will, get to the bottom of them if they're issues. And if you've run into problems, again, reach out to a supervisor or a coordinator and see what kind of help you can get. They're going to help you. They're going to back you up with this stuff and make sure that we can get folks on the right track. All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Bye.